We welcome everyone to our Bountiful City Work Session tonight, Tuesday, June 27th, and we are having a discussion about our parking ordinance update. So we'll turn the time over to our Planning Director, Mr. Astorga.
Thank you, Mayor and City Council. We just wanted to take some time to make sure that we're on the same page and to receive further input from you regarding parking within the city. We had a discussion about the general plan update on May 23rd, where we had a discussion about parking and where we were at with that, specifically based on the applicant submitted application that was recently submitted by Mr. Egan, who happens to be here. And in that, we want to, at this time, this is item 1 on, as written on the staff report. We're on page 3. This is the first part of the specific direction that we would like to receive, which is a confirmation that if the council desires to have an overall evaluation of residential parking requirements, we're talking about ratios within the entire city and not just solely focused on downtown. So we just wanted to make sure that we're on the same page in that we are addressing the applicant's application, which we are. We had a good discussion with the Planning Commission back on June 6th, and currently that's been continued to the July 8th meeting in order for us to follow the Planning Commission's recommendation as they would like to study several items, and that'll come on under item 2 from the agenda, as we have a little bit of time, and we move forward on the July 18th, by the way, with the consent of the property owner to get us over on July 18th. In that, we're also working with the police department and the streets department, as well as the Main Street merchants in getting their input regarding snow removal, business parking, and other components regarding parking. So the first question that we have, we would like to receive confirmation that council desires an overall evaluation of residential parking. That's what we believe, what we heard, but we just want to confirm that. So can we turn the time over to you to see if that's what council desires?
Sure, thank you. So, council, we need to give direction about whether or not we want an entire consideration of parking throughout the city. If we want that before or after the general plan is done, if we want, we know that because of a text amendment that we are looking at downtown parking, we know that we're doing that right now. That's the priority, but then the question is if we're also considering parking citywide.
Correct.
And if so, when?
Right.
Okay, so
The when would be the follow-up after you provide direction. But yes, absolutely correct.
okay. What are your thoughts, council members?
Mayor, I'm happy to chime in. I am very interested in our text amendment and in looking at our downtown parking area. I think that's been on our radar for quite a while. It's where we seem to have the most requests, and where we're looking to work on vibrancy, where we have more requests for density, and so I think that particularly makes sense. In terms of the overall city, I would be curious for an update from the staff and planning commission related to trends they see, recommendations they might have, but I'm not necessarily particularly interested in seeing like a draft ordinance. I'm also happy to wait for that citywide kind of staff report overview of ideas for after the general plan. Downtown, I'd like to see us move fast and robustly, because I feel like we have already had discussion there.
Thanks. Do you have a thought, Councilman Bell?
Largely just echoing Councilwoman Bradshaw's remarks, that I'm very interested in the downtown area and the implications that has on development and feasibility for a property owner. I haven't heard maybe only a couple comments in the residential areas. That doesn't seem to be any consternation or friction that I'm hearing. While I think it's important to look at that, I don't see the urgency of that. I think parking is a huge part of development. And once it's developed, it's really hard to go backwards or change it. And so I'm a little more cautious to not be haste in a decision there where we don't have timelines that I'm aware of that we need to respond within. So I'd like to focus on the downtown area and making sure that we get it right or absolutely move in the right direction for our downtown area. But I'm not seeing huge issues elsewhere in the city, and I'd like to finish the general plan update, get our character and vision that we want, that the citizens want, and then that can help shape and form our future code changes that might follow thereafter.
Thank you. To your point too, I think sometimes, there might be things that as the general plan is presented and as we adopt that and as we consider that, there might be areas and zones where parking might be affected. And then as Mr. Astorga has said in the past, the general plan completion is kind of a starting point for us to then look at the code and see what, if any, changes we need to make based on what it recommends. And so I think that seems wise too, to be able to see what those results are and then see if there are changes resulting in that because of maybe changes in zones or things that might affect parking. What other thoughts do you have, Council?
I agree with Councilmembers Bradshaw and Bell. I'm okay waiting at this point and staying the course of where we're going with the general plan and kind of seeing how things pan out.
And I'm happy echoing Councilmember Segura Bar, who echoed Councilmember Bell, who echoed Councilmember Bradshaw. I'm happy to address the downtown area now. I would note, however, that there are other parts of town, specifically those parts of town zoned multifamily, that we probably will want to take a pretty good look at as the process moves forward after the general plan's completed, or maybe even before.
Could I ask a question on that point, maybe to
Please.
you, Councilmember, or to Francisco? Our downtown zone is easy to define with its kind of known boundaries, but I agree with you, there are areas where we have multifamily or we have a commercial-ish component. And so the question, I guess, that I have would be, those areas to me would be, if downtown is a first tier, want to address that right away, those would maybe be a second tier for me, and then our truly residential single-family zones. I concur that I'm not hearing concerns there, and there maybe are alternate pressures there about winter parking, and the further up the hill you go, the more snow you get, at least if we continue having snow like we did last year. So is there a clean way to know what those other areas are, because they feel just a little bit gray and squishy to pin down, just like the downtown zone has the nice clean lines?
Great point.
I have a thought kind of addressing that to some degree. If we can just remember what, I know some of us are involved at different degrees with the general plan. We have character zones that are being drafted and discussed. And those character zones, for example, say Orchard Drive would have a different feel than downtown, but that would obviously be a different feel than on the Bench or the Foothills. And so depending on what that character zone is, that would then have a different parking requirement and an intent. So I'm cautious to get too far ahead of that general plan where we have those character zones and we're mapping those out and have certain characteristics that we're trying to achieve in that. And parking's such a big part of that, but Yeah.
If I could add in that, there are 3 points that I would like to make in the basic differences between the downtown areas and the other RM and even mixed-use zones, in that the biggest item is that the RM districts have a density cap, 7, 13, 19, and 25. I think I got that right. And downtown does not. So the density cap for downtown is parking. In my other areas, the other zones, there's already a mechanism that says this is what we're willing to live with. So as the mayor indicated, also Councilman Higginson and Councilman Bell, this is a function of, number one, deciding on those policies and strategies of the general plan, and then following up on which action of implementation we're willing to take. If we're going to take a strategy of doing one zone change at a time, or if we want to start rezoning the city, obviously not all at once, but neighborhood by neighborhood, area by area, which would then dictate density, development analysis, uses, and then that's when parking would kick in. So it's extremely appropriate in what the council has directed, that for the entire city, let's wait until we make those policy decisions. The other item I wanted to discuss is the proximity for downtown and our bus rapid transit and our current bus line, in that people have the ability to be within a quarter of a mile from a bus area where they have these services. So another point of why it would be appropriate, obviously, to entertain the applicant application and wait on all of the other components based on that proximity that where downtown is located. So I think I'm answering the question. As a professional, I find it appropriate with this direction, and that's why we're here. So at this time, unless council has any more questions for myself, I'd like to move on to the second part, if that's okay.
Sounds good.
Moving on to, at that June 6th Planning Commission meeting, the commission asked me, hey, Francisco, what's being done? What are the current trends? And the current trends that we see throughout not just the city or even the state or maybe even the nation is academia and more forward-thinking, or whatever you want to call it, urban amenities, cities with urban amenities, are looking at or started to implementing not just a parking reduction, but also, for example, switching maximums to minimums, or even having a maximum and a minimum range, as well as giving up the parking regulation, saying this is a function of the market. Let the applicant, through their traffic engineer and economist, decide how many parking spaces are needed. As written on the staff report, in my research, parking regulation by municipalities started sometime in the 50s, as people started using the vehicle for more than just recreational use at the time, and the purpose was simply so it didn't spill over to adjacent neighborhoods or even other businesses. And that's when the vehicle took off, no pun intended, that's when cities really started having this issue with parking in other locations. The Planning Commission then forwarded the item with the direction to say, Francisco would like to look at these 3 scenarios, and they're outlined on page 4 of the staff report. The first one is we're going to continue with the current applicant request, which was a parking ratio reduction. That's just looking at current trends. We are looking at our neighbors. We are looking at the Institute of Transportation Engineers and their recommendations. We're looking at everything, and it could be any combination. I even wrote on their report, we do it per bedroom count. Other municipalities simply do it by the size of each unit. There's different ways of allocating a parking ratio. We're doing that right now, and we're going to continue with that strategy. The commission didn't say give up on this one, move on to another one, but they said, hey, let's look at that, but let's consider the other two strategies, such as creating a minimum maximum range, which simply says, here's the minimum, but no more than this number. It goes one step further than the current minimum requirement. And then the third trend that we may be seeing nationally is letting the market dictate what on-site, off-street parking they should have. So we were getting ready to provide an analysis on the three strategies, and at this time we thought it would be prudent to ask you guys what you thought, based on the fact that we're looking at not just a reduction, but we're also looking at more specific, alternate strategies regarding parking. The Planning Commission didn't necessarily say we're leaning more towards C or B or A more than any other strategy. They simply wanted, they requested that as staff, we research that and come back with some alternatives and possible recommendations. Just to go over procedure, all legislative items regarding the land use code require that it goes through the Planning Commission, that they have a public hearing, and they forward some sort of recommendation to the city council. And as a city council, as a legislative body, you have the ultimate word and say regarding what gets done. We don't do this often, but some municipalities have not necessarily forwarded exactly or approved what the Planning Commission has offered, but in some cases they remanded it back to the commission. And I'm not saying that's what's going to happen. That wasn't the intent, but that's always an option that you do have with that. So at this time, we'd simply like to check in with you, that you give direction to staff and the commission regarding which regulatory parking strategies the Planning Commission should consider. Specifically, what we've been doing, which is not necessarily a parking reduction, but making sure that our parking ratios are accurately depicted. We believe that is a reduction. Or that's A. Option B, setting minimum and maximum parking requirements, or eliminating parking requirements ratios entirely. That's the second part of the input that we request from you tonight.
Thank you. It seems like in the discussions I've had with council or Planning Commission, it seems that there's just a general appetite to reduce. And it seems like the question is just how far we go, right? But
Absolutely, and to give you an idea, and I'll be quick with this example. The applicant provided what they thought would be prudent. The commission at the meeting indicated, you know what, we should consider having a fourth standard for a studio apartment, which was not included in their assessment submitted by the applicant. So the commission does have an opportunity to say, we're willing to take their recommendation, discuss it, even change it, and even add some additional parameters herein. Just to give you a quick example, that was prudent from them to do. We'll see how council feels about adding a fourth study, a fourth category, and that the code doesn't mention. In our consistent interpretation has always been that a studio apartment is a one-bedroom, so it's the same ratio, and it's to be decided. But that's part of the function of what something that staff can even, and even the commission can implement through a code amendment, in that perhaps they didn't think about it, perhaps it was deliberate, it doesn't matter. Here's an improvement to the code. Let's discuss, deliberate, and move on. As a quick actual example from the parking discussion.
thanks. Yeah, what are your thoughts, council?
Do you want me to start so you can all agree?
Absolutely. It was so easy.
I did so well on the
It was
last
so
item.
easy.
Okay. Here goes then. Here's hoping I can be 2 for 2. I would say that I'm interested in hearing the Planning Commission's thoughts and recommendations with regard to option A on parking ratio reduction and option B, a parking ratio range. I'm not as interested in C. I'd love to trust the private market entirely, but it sometimes leads us into interesting decisions when the free market exists without any hand of government to check it. And so I'm not quite that comfortable.
Just a quick question, Francisco. When we looked at our requirements, we required the most spaces of our surrounding communities.
Yeah, we were one of the highest, or tied for highest, Amber, probably.
What other thoughts do you have, Council?
Mayor, could I?
Please.
Surprisingly, probably to most of you, I'm not in favor of C. I think that we need to have parking regulations. Grisham wrote a book called The Runaway Jury, and attending that planning commission meeting, I feel like many who were in attendance thought they were watching the planning version of The Runaway Jury. But it was an interesting discussion, and we do have two professionals on our planning commission who deal with these kinds of items professionally. So for us to hold an emergency meeting to advise the planning commission on how they should advise us, I don't know if it was necessary, but this is a good discussion. I do think we need to have a studio category, and I think we need to listen to Ms. Gilmore's counsel that probably along transit lines, studio apartments ought to have a parking stall requirement, maybe one or less than one. So that's my thoughts on it. Thanks for having the discussion and for humoring me in my remarks. And yeah, I think that probably A is our best option, and do a serious look at some good reductions.
I'm disappointed there wasn't a book review attached to the first item. Can we revisit?
It's been so long.
No, don't revisit. Mr. Council Member Higginson, so
Yeah.
just to clarify, you do not support B?
No, I'm not a professional. I don't understand yet maximums and removal altogether. I do think, as was stated that night and has been stated many times by Mr. Knighton, who I visited with sitting next to him that night, that responsible folks are going to be mindful of the people they're going to be building for, and they're going to include the right number of parking stalls so that their product is attractive to folks that might want to live there. So I think that reducing is great now. Maybe when I have more of an education on removal of those things, then I'll understand better maybe B and C. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, any other thoughts?
I echo Councilwoman Bradshaw's comments. I want to give maybe a little more substance to why I feel like C is not a good option, in that once something is entitled and or developed, what is built there really is there for decades and a generation or two or three. And that's what we want. We don't want to see things built and torn down and not work. And so to see the pendulum swing all the way to the other side doesn't seem wise. And we have a need for parking, and to sort of remove it. And we have good and wise developers, and we have a lot of great developers here in our community that I think would do a great job. Not all developers are created equal, and some have long-term desires and some have really short-term desires. So I think it's important that we provide some guardrails on that in that capacity. The other thing of my thought is, I think it'd be really helpful to find a city or a development, a large development, a city that we think is what we want to be, and look at what their parking requirements are, because it is such a big piece of how a lot is divided up and uses are determined. And if we can sometimes see that vision at the end, if you can start with the end in mind and say that is really functioning well, it has good ratios and the masses of the buildings are great, and we can see what their code is. I think that would be really insightful and helpful. To know how that turned out and what we can reasonably predict would turn out here. So finding a city somewhere in the US or not that we would think would be appropriate, I think would be really helpful in guiding us in that direction. While looking at like our neighboring cities, I think that's really important only for one reason, is development tends to go where there's least friction and biggest bang for the buck. And if we have a neighboring city where that development wants to go because of that, I think that's important to inform us in our decision. But I don't know that the community, the surrounding communities is what we want to be in 20 or 30 years. I think we want to look bigger and better than that. I think we want to look at, is there a city in Colorado or on the East Coast or wherever it might be? If that city exists, I think that would be really helpful for me.
So, Mr. Hill, we're gonna have to amend my budget so I can tour the nation, finding this city.
That's not what I heard. But I know a great place in Hawaii that I'd be happy to go back to.
No, it's me.
So Google Earth is a really good virtual.
I don't have access to it. I don't know why. I have to see it in person. Councilmember Bell, how about B? What are your thoughts on that strategy?
I don't know that I'm opposed to it. I'm not opposed to it, and I think it should be in the cards to work with.
Thanks.
When I look at B, just something Councilman Higginson said that I think rings true to me is it's not maximums and minimums aren't something that I'm familiar with, and so I'm sure that some developers would be very familiar with the concepts, but I think that it's good if we strive for code that is really, user-friendly, easy to understand, easy for all parties to know what is the rule. So,
Mayor, I don't know that I love B, but I don't know that I hate B. I think that B is one of those that I'd like to see our professionals on the Planning Commission, focus on. See how it applies. See if they can, not doing a physical trip, but using the magic of the internet, find a city that they can explore and apply B and see if that's something that would work for Bountiful or not. But that's, to me, that is, I think, the beauty of the Planning Commission is, we can assign them to a certain extent some research projects and to think about and explore. And so B for me would be go explore this and noodle on it, see how it fits in Bountiful, see how it fits with the different placemakings that are being looked at in the general plan. And maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. And maybe going with tried and true option A really is the best bet. But that's where I would, if it were solely me, would tell them to spend their time, is spend your time exploring A and B and don't waste your time on C.
And just so we're giving Mr. Astorga good direction, the first order of business, of course, is to respond to the text amendment applicant and in the downtown zone, looking at the parking there. And so Mr. Astorga is needing now to be working on recommendations for that, to be responsive to that applicant. And so to come back with a few options for the Planning Commission and for us in that vein. Do you feel like you have the direction you need to look at tools in A and B to make recommendations?
We do, given the current climate for development at the time. I think most developers would simply stick to the minimum, and that would be it. In my career, I've only heard, not that I've been looking for it, of one municipality that had to change the code for a specific use because they had a minimum and a maximum. So it doesn't happen too often, but it does happen where they need to do some further tweaking. But I don't think it would it would take that much more time to entertain B. As half of B is A, finding what that minimum is. It's the same thing, it'd just be finding out what the maximum would be. So it's not an issue providing that alternative, in my opinion.
I have another question, if I may. Please. We mentioned we're going through the general plan, and we've hired a consultant to help us with that. Is it out of scope for that consultant to guide us and help us with parking in our downtown?
Yeah, we've asked them if they could provide not necessarily a staff report, but their opinion. And that was, I think, part of the discussion here on May 23rd. It was reiterated by not council member, but planning commission member, Price Hewish, that we needed to have their opinion regarding parking. And we communicated that with them, and it's not going to be a 10-page report or anything like that. It's going to be their written opinion from Logan Simpson Design on what comments we are receiving regarding parking. They're willing to help us out with that.
May I also, if they have any cities that they'd recommend that we look at as a case study, that might be helpful too. They have a pretty broad reach and knowledge of the country.
We can do that, but it affects my tour of the nation, but we can.
Okay.
I'm not giving up.
Mayor, could I?
Please.
I think that it's important to keep the goal in mind as well, that this was going to be an expedited process for the applicants. I wondered if Mr. Astorga is also wanting discussion tonight on the pretty lengthy discussion the Planning Commission had on covered parking requirements versus not requiring covered parking, and whether that should be the city's business as to requiring that of developers.
Yeah, so we can discuss that. I think we have time. So, yeah, let's get your opinion. The code requires in the downtown area, I believe it's only in the downtown area, and that's what we're focused on. Anyways, that for each unit, for each residential unit, that the developer builds or accommodates one covered parking space. Some municipalities have that requirement, others plainly do not, and simply provide that opportunity again for the market to decide whether that government should be a government not issued, but required amenity or not. So that's something that we are looking at internally in staff. I believe that the Planning Commission was more so leaning towards removing that requirement. Obviously, we didn't take a vote. We needed more time to analyze that. That is not what the applicant requested in their application, but we're certainly looking at the effects of that. I call that's an amenity, to have that covered parking. We've spoken with some local developers, and they have indicated that it's a great amenity for their tenants. That most likely, and I can't commit anybody, if the city were to remove that requirement, they would build it or consider it in their developments. That's what they have told us. So we can discuss that, or we can let the Planning Commission provide that recommendation.
I'm happy with either. I don't have a strong opinion either way. I just thought the discussion was interesting.
Yeah, it seemed that they were just asking the question, is this something that government should be dictating to developers, that they need to provide covered parking? But yeah, I'm sure that there are some developers that would do it anyway because they feel like it would attract tenants that would want to take advantage of that, and then I'm sure others that wouldn't. But so, any other thoughts on that, Council?
I think I'm kind of just agnostic on the covered parking. I mean, that's one I would say that depends on, the market price that the developer wants to get for their units, and certain prices are probably going to require covered parking of various types and kinds and security levels. As long as there's places to park, I don't know that I care deeply about whether it's covered.
Great. Any other thoughts on covered parking or any other direction for Mr. Astorga for the parking, this parking ordinance?
Mayor, if I may.
Yes, please.
I don't think we've heard from Councilmember Segura Bar regarding item 2.
I apologize. I am perfectly comfortable with option A, indifferent to option B, and would prefer to defer to our professionals. And for the reasons stated by my colleagues and specifically Councilmember Bell, I'm not comfortable with option C. I apologize. Thank you.
Also, just for whatever it's worth, Councilwoman Price Hewish is excused. She's on a vacation with her family, but she did say that she's in favor of parking amendments, just not eliminating parking recs altogether. So that was her
So that would be C.
opinion.
Thank you.
Yeah, so hopefully that gives you some good thoughts on what, knowing where
It
we're
gives
at.
us input, it gives us direction. We'll report back with the commission on the 18th. And I would like to simply take the time to acknowledge Mr. Egan for giving us the ability to take a little bit more time, in that we're not here tonight voting on this item. As we're working with streets, police, Main Street merchants, we didn't know that we were going to have this discussion tonight, but we appreciate his patience in his application. And I believe at this point, nothing that we have discussed or anything that my department will propose, I don't think Mr. Egan will oppose it. Obviously, we'll provide that recommendation to him in writing prior to the meeting, and as it is his application. And I appreciate the unofficial partnership that we've had this far with council, commission, and the applicant. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, council.
Thank you so much. So just so we're clear on next steps, do you anticipate having some possible options for the planning commission to consider at the next meeting?
Yes,
Great.
yes,
Great.
that's the point.
Okay, thank you. And then it comes back to us?
We've got it scheduled on the 18th. Never say never, in that we haven't noticed the council meeting, as the planning commission is an independent body. So we'll notice that item the day after they make a recommendation. So it could be as early as late July or sometime in August. I don't want to commit until we have that actual recommendation from the commission. But those are the next steps.
Great, thank you. Okay, any other questions on this topic, on this parking issue? Okay, we will take a little break now before we start our regular meeting at 7 o'clock.
Mayor, I
Thanks.
did think
Yes.
of one thing.
Okay, let's hear it.
Mr. Astorga, what about the removal of visitor parking requirements? I don't remember there being specific direction on that, or even a lot of discussion on that.
Good question.
I think we did discuss that, in that the same way that we don't have a visitor for a single-family dwelling anywhere in the city. The trend is to simply either, you can look at it either way. You're either eliminating it or you're incorporating it in the rate itself. It doesn't matter how you look at it. We don't say you're supposed to have 2 parking spaces. Where's your other car? Obviously the property owner could regulate or manage the parking how they see fit. But we are looking into making it easier for the developer, instead of adding that 0.25 to the actual ratio or rate, and simply considering all things parking for the actual tenant and their visitors in the rate itself.
Thank you.
Does that make any sense?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So, thanks.
that's
I
an
don't want to
important-
prolong the meeting any.
Yeah, that's an important point. Any other thoughts on that?
I don't have any thoughts on that, but I would like to share. This happened last week. I was in an interview and I was asked, what keeps you going as a planner? And I said, learning what other cities are doing and having discussions with city council and planning commission regarding parking. That was a literal answer that I gave as I was interviewing someone to hire for our staff. Amber was there. That was no lie. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Thanks. Any other thoughts from the council? Okay, we will, do you have something to
I
add?
was just going to say, I'm so glad that we're having this, and I'm excited to have it wrapped up and moving forward. So thank you for everybody's time and commitment to this. That's all, sorry. It was because we have so much time left.
Thank you. That's right. Thank you for your work.
Just you wait until we get onto the other parking stuff, the retail, the office, the restaurant. That'll be even funner. Thank you.
Sounds great. Okay, thank you so much. We will have a little break until our meeting at 7.